Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Wednesday, June 21st. Derek Van Riper, Saris here with you on this episode. We discuss the long-term outlook for Vinnie Pasquantino as we learned that he recently had shoulder surgery, which ended his 2023 season. We'll talk about a problem that I'm referring to as the Sandy Alcantara problem, which is really just a group of pitchers whose results seem worse than they should be given what they bring to the table as pitchers. Sandy, of course, on the mound as we record this with another bumpy outing in a tough spot against the Blue Jays. Got a few other pitchers that are in similar groups. Yeah, it's not good. And then we've got a question about pull percentages that I thought was kind of interesting because we were talking about Nolan Gorman and a few other players that have this skill. Isaac Paredes especially does good things when he pulls it, and then there's a lot of questions about what he does when he doesn't pull it. So I figured we could dig into that question for a bit as well. So we'll start with Vinnie Pasquantino. The long-term outlook for him following surgery on his right shoulder, left-handed hitter. Right shoulder means lead shoulder. He did some digging, and apparently that is the more problematic of the two shoulders to recover from for a hitter,
Well, and by digging, I just texted a major league hitting coach. So
you're not supposed to reveal how the sausage is made.
It took me a really long time to bang out that text and get a response. But the guess was that the front shoulder would be a more difficult shoulder because of the front shoulder maybe bearing a little bit more of the force of impact and then definitely follow through. So the more of a guess when it comes to impact, but, the follow through is definitely going to be painful. And I think, yes, that is after you impact the ball and, it's the end of your swing, but you as a human being want to avoid pain. And so if there is still any pain, you're not going to maybe quite let it fly the same way if you know that when you get to that follow through part, it hurts.
Mm-hmm.
So, the good news, I guess, quote unquote, good news. This is not going to come off as good news to Kansas City fans, but the good news is the Royals are bad. Sorry, this
was
makes
the good
sense.
news.
This makes sense. They're not going to rush it back.
Oh, okay, sure, yes. Yes.
So there's no
cheer up, Royals fans. Your team is so bad that they can take their time with one of the players you enjoy watching every day while you hate watching the rest of the team.
I know. It's terrible. It's not what you want to hear. But I mean, the Royals are fighting the A's for worst record in baseball right now, and I know that Randy Jesulieri retweeted. I forget who he was retweeting, but the person he was retweeting was saying, and the Royals are trying.
Right, big difference in effort in this case, and yeah, I talked to Keith Law about it on the Athletic Baseball Show last Friday. It's a long road ahead for JJ Piccolo as they try to figure out what's going wrong in Kansas City this season. And
what were the best prospects that Keith was talking about?
That was kind of the problem, is that they don't really have a wave of young talent ready to join the guys that they've just been bringing up the last couple of years. This is that young core with Vinnie Pasquantino and Bobby Witt Jr. and MJ Melendez. And
those guys they hit the ball hard. Pasquantino hits the ball hard and makes good contact. I mean, those three could be a core. It's just that you have to come up with the pitching fast enough while you still have them. And that's gonna be turning around the tanker pretty fast because the pitching hasn't been good there. But in terms of Pasquantino, there is an example out there playing right now who's doing pretty well and demonstrates that if you are going to have an injury like this, sometimes it's better to have it young. And his name is
Josh Young.
Young, yeah. So Josh Young is out there. I think he had the same problem to the lead shoulder, and he missed about the same amount of time. And it's not without bumps. He isn't exactly who we thought he was before he was hurt, but this is also year one. So if this is year one for Josh Young, I feel like Vinnie Pasquantino can come back fine next year. I do wonder how much of a discount I want to put on him in year one coming back from this in drafts and stuff. I think a little bit cautious.
I think when you look at the numbers before the injury, the hard hit rate was down from where it was when Vinny debuted last year, down to 40.1%. Barrel rate, not surprisingly, came down a little bit from 8.8% to 7.4% with it. He was chasing more outside the zone, 35.9% O swing percentage this year compared to 28.9% as a rookie. Walking a little less. Max EV came down almost 3 miles per hour. When Vinnie Pasquantino was a player we were excited about prior to his debut about a year or so ago.
Was he playing hurt at all though? Like was this like, oh, his shoulder's been bothering him, oh, we get an MRI, or like was there an impact event?
Yeah, you wonder. I don't recall offhand if there was I don't think it was an impact thing. We'll take a look at that momentarily. But I was thinking about this more from the perspective of what kind of player was he proving himself to be, like, over his first calendar year?
Reoccurring shoulder injury.
Yeah, so that paints a little more
affected the max EV and the barrel rate a little bit.
I think so. Even if you just smash last season and this season together, you're talking about a guy that hit 272 with a 355 OBP and hit 19 homers and
still
550 plate appearances. It's a good player.
Yeah,
one who doesn't strike out, one that draws walks. And I think the guy that he reminded me of when he came up, as far as his minor league production, was Nathaniel Lowe. And it took Lowe a little bit of time to get to that power. So I think we're still on an arc like that, where if that's your most likely outcome for Vinnie Pasquantino, you're not disappointed.
He could still have a season. If you're talking about keeper leagues and stuff, this might be a good time to buy. He could still have a season where he hits 300 with 30 homers. I mean, that's the type of skills he has.
Yeah, right. There's room for more, but the meaty part of the curve still gives you a pretty good player once he comes out of this. And the longer term outcomes for surgery like this have actually improved quite a bit too, compared to where they were 10 plus years ago. So as bleak as things seem for Royals fans right now, I think the good news is there are a lot of signs that still pointing in the right direction with Vinnie Pasquantino, and knowing that this was something that he was maybe playing through for a little while, especially, it also gives you an idea of why the follow-up wasn't quite as good as what we saw during that debut a year ago.
I also think that it's easier to, and this is a little bit philosophical and less grounded in like research or numbers that I've necessarily seen. But from what I know and what I've seen among teams, I think it's easier to turn around pitching development than it is hitting development. So the fact that they, despite having a pitcher's park as their major league park, have been able to develop, some hitters, not like across the board. They still have the sort of Nicky Lopez types that they like, where, they don't hit the ball hard or do anything especially that well offensively, but they have developed in Witt and Pasquantino and Melendez, I think, 3 players that hit the ball well and look like young players that can hit the ball for a while. If you're asking, Melendez might have a 211 average right now or whatever, but he hits the ball really hard. So I believe in him. So, maybe this task is less Sisyphean as it seems. I mean, you've got a nice pitcher's park as your home base. Like, if you can just, produce slightly better pitchers, it could take off fairly quickly.
It could. I think it's kind of easy to wonder, like, what's going wrong for Witt from a fantasy perspective. Only batting average, like, from a fantasy perspective, you're happy. He's on pace to go 25 homers with 45 plus steals. That's great. You're not mad about that at all, even if it comes with a 246 average the rest of the way, and there's a chance that he gets better and you get better numbers across the board. With Melendez, seeing the K rate up over 30% is a little bit of a surprise. Only 6 homers so far this year. I expected if he was going to be a low average guy like this, that he'd be getting to power a lot more consistently.
Oh my God, he's hitting 211. That's hilarious.
Yeah,
I wasn't looking at his page.
Yeah, you had that exactly right. So it's not, it's
the
not
quality
just
of contact is good with him, and I do think he can get it back down to like 26% or something. Like, I think this is he's like a free swing, a little bit more of a free swinger. Go and get it, pull hitter with power. Like, it might take a second to sort of figure out when to take those shots and when to have a 2-strike approach or whatever, but. There's a really good hitter in Melendez still.
They've got a few other guys that they've traded for over the past year or so, and Samad Taylor is one of them. He's up right now. It's sort of like, well, who who won in playing time as a result of Pasquantino's unfortunate injury. Nick Pratto just plays first base now instead of playing in the outfield, and they've got Samad Taylor up. He was a somewhat popular pickup over the weekend for some cheap speed. And then Dairon Blanco also getting an opportunity. I think it was funny. I was looking at Blanco's profile, and I was like, that kind of reminds me of John Birdie. I opened up Twitter, and I see a bunch of people in our industry saying, hey, maybe it's John Birdie. I'm like, all right. So we're
Samad Taylor you're talking about? Or?
For Blanco, because he's a little older. Samad Taylor, he's only 24, he'll be 25 next month. It's not like a high-end prospect, but at least he's a different type of player compared to the mashers with a little bit of swing and miss downside. Taylor could provide some balance. If he keeps that K rate down the way he did at AAA this year, and even going back to last season, if he draws walks, he could actually find a spot as a table setter.
Yeah, and just, given his age and power output, like he's definitely more exciting for a team that's looking to the future than Blanco. So I think Taylor's my pickup of the group.
Yeah, I think he's the easy player to at least roll the dice on and see what happens. He was pretty blocked in Toronto anyway. This is at least a clear path for him to take over some time. Can play a couple spots too, so I don't think the Royals are going to have any problem fitting him into their plans if they like what they see from Samad Taylor at the plate. Let's move on to some other big topics, though. Let's get to that Sandy Alcantara problem. The pitchers who are worse than they should be results-wise based on their arsenals. And, when I look at the pitch mix for Sandy Alcantara, the velocity, the way he's trying to attack hitters, it all looks pretty similar to what he was doing a year ago when he won the NL Cy Young Award. I can't quickly explain why the ratios are so bad. And the bigger question with Sandy has always been, for a guy that has electric velo and 3 pitches like this, he doesn't get as many strikeouts as you'd expect him to. He gets a decent number of swinging strikes, but a strikeout rate that lags a little bit behind that has always kind of been part of the package, and he's just made up for it with volume. We're talking about a guy that by results has been excellent throughout his big league career now, and is in a pretty rough stretch here through the first half of the season. So is there anything you see in terms of pitch mix, location strategy, anything underneath that explains why he has not looked like the guy that he was a season ago?
Like, top line takeaway? Not really. Like I'm looking at his, the movement on his pitches. If that's changed, no, not really. Looking at his usage, there's some stuff here where with his four seam and his sinker, especially the lefties, where it looks like he becomes a little predictable with the four seam as an out pitch with runners on, especially. There's got to be something with runners on and predictability. I'm only now sort of jumping off of the pitch usage, which there are some differences in pitch usage with runners on. But the fact that his strand rate is 60% this year versus 79% last year and projected to be 73%, I mean, that's letting a lot of runners get on base and score. And that's a problem for someone whose strikeout rate is down. He's going to have runners on base. They're going to, put balls in play. And so there's something going on there. It could be along the lines of pitch tipping by biomechanics, or it could be along the lines of pitch tipping by pitch usage becoming more predictable. But in any case, it's has something to do with lefties, and it has something to do with his fastball mix, his four seam and his two seam. And he's just become more hittable this year, especially against lefties. His numbers, the sinker is giving up, this is before today, his sinker's giving up 490 slugging, and his four seam's giving up a 377 slugging. So I think he's sort of stuck trying to find a hard pitch that works against lefties, and neither of them is working right now. And so you've seen that his four seam usage is going down over time over the course of this month, and that means more sinkers to lefties, and he has a 490 slugging on those. So I think he's struggling with the pitch mix. He's struggling with what to do with players on base. But in terms of the shape and movement of his pitches, I don't really see a difference. And so I tend to think that this is something where you just need to figure out some sort of plan of attack that works better. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think with Sandy, it really wasn't difficult going into this season to say, sure, the 2.28 ERA and the .98 WHIP last season were great.
High watermarks,
That's not where, Aaron Nola had a season like that a while back. No one expected him to repeat it. If you expected a full repeat of that, I don't know why you expected that. Then you sort of deserve to be a little disappointed. You didn't deserve to be this disappointed. Projections the rest of the season, not counting today's start, they'll probably get a tick worse after today's outing. The Bats got him at a 3.74 ERA and a 1.19 WHIP. Steamer 3.75 with a 1.24. I actually think Sandy's more likely to be a tick better than that. Closer to his career numbers is probably what I'd expect from him. More of like a mid-threes ERA and a sub 120 WHIP would actually make a lot of sense to me here at Forward. But what I was thinking about yesterday, it was a Yuri Perez start day on Tuesday, and watching Yuri Perez, if you told me they were going to throw the same number of innings, I would take Yuri Perez over Sandy Alcantara right now. I think it's a better arsenal that's designed to just get swings and misses and consistently put hitters away. That changeup is one of my favorite pitches in the game. The innings
pitch, you said if they had the same amount.
If you knew they were going to pitch the same number of innings, I would take Yuri today. I think he's already showing a ceiling that is just absolutely absurd. It's a little bit like when we saw Shane McClanahan debut at the Rays a few years ago. You watch it for even a handful of starts, and you're like, this guy is top level. He's that good. Now we just have to deal with all the careful management throughout this season and even next year too, because we had a Twitter question about this rookie class of pitchers. And it was asking us more or less who's going to be a full-time starting pitcher next year in terms of workload, start to finish. And I would say Perez, he'll be a starter all year. I have no doubt about that. It's just how they use him, how they skip him around off days, all-star break, all that kind of stuff. You still have to worry about that for one more year, whereas some of the other pitchers in the question, guys like Tanner Bybee, they're going to be at a point where they're basically like veteran starters in terms of how they can be used. That's the only downside.
Yeah, I guess Yuri's on the close. I mean, he's not Mason Miller. Mason Miller is the most exaggerated version of this. And then I guess Yuri's there in terms of workload. But I tend to think that most of the guys that are up this year will be pretty close to full-time starters next year. You know, because they're all the guys that are up other than Mason Miller that are up this year are going to push 120, 130 innings this year. And if you do that, then next year they're 150, 160. And the average sort of projection for a starting pitcher is, 160-ish, these days. It's just it's a fact. So, I think that most of those guys will be there. It's also interesting to put into context that rest of season projection by the Bat. The Bat has been most aggressive in changing the run environment to reflect what's out there right now. And so a 3.74 may not sound great, but it's the 14th best rest of season projection for a starting pitcher. So it's still good. And when we were talking about, like, is there a comp for Sandy Alcantara? Like, is there another guy out there like him? And so what I just did was 2021 through 2023 on Fangraphs, their pitch type values. So just who's a righty with a really good change. So I sorted by change up pitch type values. And so top of the list are Rich Hill and Shane McClanahan. Rich Hill, he like throws 5 of them and they, whatever. That's not it. But Shane McClanahan is up there. Max Fried is a righty. Then there's Sandy Alcantara, Logan Webb, Merrill Kelly, Brandon Woodruff, Zach Gallen. Now, I don't think he looks like Max Fried. So I don't think it's a Max Fried situation. But Shane McClanahan, obviously a lefty. But on that list are Logan Webb and Brandon Woodruff. And Merrill Kelly is a soft tosser, so I don't really think that he's in the same. I mean, Sandy Alcantara sits 97. Let us not forget that. And so Logan Webb, I think, is on the lower end, and Brandon Woodruff is not a bad comp because Brandon Woodruff has a pretty good 4-seam. His 2-seam is a little bit better, has a pretty good slider, and has a really good change. Brandon Woodruff is not a bad comp to Sandy Alcantara. And so I think within Brandon Woodruff, Logan Webb, and Sandy Alcantara, you have some good comps where you can say, no, that's who he is writ large, right? Like that is what kind of a player he is. And in terms of projections, rest of season, Brandon Woodruff, 11th best rest of season ERA projection. Logan Webb, 17th best rest of season ERA projection. So, like, as bad as Sandy Alcantara's been, I still think he's somewhere between the 12th and 17th best pitcher out there.
Sure. And it's only a little bit off of, where he was going back during draft season. And the other part of this is that he's been extremely durable. So he's been able to make up for a lower K rate by racking up so many innings. The volume simply offsets it. Back-to-back seasons over 200 Ks.
That he's hurt. Like there's no velo loss, no movement changes, no release point changes. Like there's no indication he's hurt.
Jeez, he was at 5 1/3 when we started recording. He ended up going through 7 innings today, despite giving up those 5 runs. I just left him in the game.
I had another. Tyler Glasnow had the same thing. He gave up like 5 in the first, and then he still made it through 5 without giving up any more or something. So, yeah. I mean, work through it, young man, right?
I saw Corbin Burns do it, too. The Diamondbacks got him for 6 runs in the first inning on Monday. Not my finest hour.
No, I was not happy about that. But I continue to believe in Sandy Alcantara. I don't, I think maybe I might have even had him in the top 5 going into the season just because I was so enamored by that volume. But I think he strikes me as someone who belongs where Logan Webb goes, which is sort of a high end number 2.
Fair enough. I mean, not a massive drop, but just a very slight drop. It's kind of we've seen enough. We know who he is. It would be silly to expect a big bump in Ks at this point. If it was going to happen, it probably would have happened already. They would have made that adjustment by now, or at least if the current staff was going to make that adjustment, it would have happened by now. Other pitchers that fit into this bucket of looking pretty good as far as everything being normal with pitch mixes and things. It's a little more complicated with Yu Darvish because he throws so many pitches, but is there anything wrong with Yu Darvish right now? 4.74 ERA, 120 whip, over a strikeout per inning. Home runs are up just a tick from last year, but not at the higher end of the ranges we've seen from him during his career. What would you advise anyone to do if they were worried about Darvish, either trading to get more pitching or possibly moving him away and trading him for less than what you would have got back on draft day?
I think I'd wait, but there has been a really large decline in how often he uses his slider. And I wonder if that's just, again, him trying not to be as predictable. I mean, it is weird to think that a guy with this many pitches might become predictable. But he does throw his slider a lot. And then, I wonder if he's not a little bit of a casualty of the sweeper craze. And it doesn't show on Brooks, but I do believe that Yu Darvish is throwing a sweeper this year. Does it show on Savant?
21% usage. Yeah, it's his most used pitch.
Yeah. And I mean, he's a guy that is a right-hander that throws a ton of breaking balls, cutters, sliders, other, did he really need a pitch to get righties out?
He throws it to righties and lefties.
And he shouldn't. So, but I think the other thing is if you've got that many pitches, it can't be that hard to, pitch mix your way out of this one. It's not like Clark Schmidt where you're like, well, if I don't throw my sweeper, what do I throw? It's like you can throw a bunch of other pitches. I think just generally I wouldn't sell low. I'm not saying that if you're in a keeper league and he's 36 and you're not in it, I would just say just wait a few more starts, right? I know that sounds silly. You think he'll get a lot more? I think he'll get that ERA closer to 4, and you'll be able to sell him a lot easier after a few good starts. So, in a redraft league, I'm also just keeping because he's a guy who strikes a lot of guys out, and I think he's going to play to his sort of 3.8, 3.9 projection going forward. Has a lot of pitches, can get past the sweeper problem for sure.
Yeah, I don't see any. I mean, velo's not really down at an alarming rate or anything. He has so many ways to get guys out. Once he throws 3 more curveballs this year, he'll have thrown 7 different pitches at least 100 times already this season.
Yeah, for sure. And if you look at his outcomes, like the slider this year has a 283 ISO, 303 batting average, and that's a 407 batting average and a 333 ISO to lefties. I mean, he didn't read my piece.
You hurt?
He was following me for a while. I don't know if he is anymore. I'm trying to get him to sit down to do a grips piece.
That would be cool.
Wouldn't it? I mean,
It'd be very cool.
there's like pitches he doesn't even throw anymore. Like we could get up to like 12.
Yeah.
He's had a pitch called the Supreme he was throwing in Chicago for a while.
Did you name it after a pizza? Why did you call it the Supreme?
It was like a pizza. It was like a split finger sinker hybrid that went 94 miles an hour. Yeah, bring out the Supreme again. That'll probably get lefties out.
You Darvish 10 years from now will still be pitching somewhere. It might be banana ball. It might be back in Japan. He's going to be pitching somewhere. I'm
He'll
convinced.
go back to Japan and be dominant.
Yeah, it'll be fun. Let's talk about Kyle Bradish for a few minutes here. He had an interesting outing against the Rays, pitched really well on Tuesday, and month by month is getting away from his fastballs. So my question for you is, what is the ceiling for Kyle Bradish as a guy that doesn't seem to have a fastball that he trusts at all right now? The secondary is good enough where he can keep doing things similar to the way he did Tuesday night, or will this catch up to him eventually? And then there's a longer term question is, can you fix this fastball given his age and where he's at in his career?
You know, I tried to look at this a couple of different ways. One of which was just to look at who's throwing their fastball the least this year. And so I just combined four-seam fastballs and sinkers. One of the problems is that Pitch Info calls Kyle Bradish's four-seam a cutter. I don't know if I believe that because it's the exact same velocity as a sinker. I know it has cut, but it's more of a cut ride four-seam. It might be semantics, but it has the same velo as a sinker, so I think it's a fastball. And Savant calls it a fastball. But using the Pitch Info things, adding them up, he's only at 17% because he uses a sinker 17%. But if you add that cutter back in and you get to 40%, there are so many pitchers that throw their fastball 40%. Dylan Cease has a dominant fastball. He throws his fastballs 41% of the time. Sonny Gray throws it 40. Eovaldi throws pretty hard. Ohtani throws his fastball 38% of the time. And he throws really hard. Shane McClanahan, 42% of the time. So in terms of like percentage thrown, as long as you call that cutter a fastball, he's not that weird. If you don't call that cutter a fastball, then he throws his fastball the least in baseball. I don't know if that's fair, but I think that cutter is a fastball. In terms of stuff plus, because you're saying that he's got this bad fastball. I kind of looked at other pitchers with bad fastballs, and right around where he is in terms of fastballs and mixes, you've got Nathan Eovaldi, Christian Javier, Aaron Nola, Julio Urias, Justin Verlander. Even if you like focus on the sinker, which has an 85, in terms of like a primary fastball, 85 stuff plus. Here are some other guys. Luis Castillo, Charlie Morton, Chris Bassett, Eduardo Rodriguez. So, Alex Cobb. So there's lots of different ways it can go from here. I mean, because yes, there are differences between Alex Cobb and Justin Verlander. I'm not trying to put them on the same list. But I do think that there's definitely a way forward for him. And, we can't lose sight of the fact that he has an elite slider. And so I think the process for him has been putting the pieces around it in a way where like, I've got this elite pitch. You're aware of this elite pitch. And, that process has something similar to what Michael Wacha is doing, right? Michael Wacha has one elite pitch. It's a changeup. If he can make you always think about the changeup while he's throwing other pitches, it can work. If he never lets he gets keyholed. So Bradish is, trying to throw all his pitches all the time. And I continue to believe in him. I think that some of the stumbles and starts in terms of striking guys out and some of the bad starts and stuff have just been him trying to figure out how to best make use of that elite slider.
Yeah, I think what's sort of troubling to me is I did a StatCast search and I was looking at bad fastballs as a group, just basically slugging percentage allowed on fastballs. And Bradish is at 576 so far this season. This four-seamer in particular is even worse. And I'm scrolling the list. I didn't split them all out. I just lumped them all together.
Okay.
I should probably split them, but
no, that's fine.
But the bad fastball club, I'm scrolling the names of guys ahead of him. I'm like, who's good that's ahead of him? That's not a reliever. Sometimes you get some relievers there that can just slider their way to. Luis Severino's high on this list. That could be a problem. It's Hayden Wesneski and Luke Weaver and Chris Flexen and Brady Singer. It's just a lot of starters that I'm not really into. But you can't just say, well, he's on this list, so he's not good. That's not at all what I'm saying. It's more like, who's had to work through this problem, or who else has this problem, and what happens to them?
And if you throw like a last month split on that, does it change? I mean, that's the one problem. I know that I today have mentioned pitch splits in terms of results, but that does become problematic because if I mentioned to you this, the slugging percentage on a pitcher who'd thrown 2 starts, that's like the equivalent sometimes. If I'm telling you what his slugging percentage is on a slider or something, you know what I mean?
Yeah, not as bad for this month. If you look at June only, a 485 slug on all fastballs for Bradish.
That's still not great,
but better. So are we saying like top 30, top 40 starter? Like where does he top out if this is how he has to work for the foreseeable future? Consistent SP3, SP4, someone you occasionally move away from for the toughest of tough matchups? Because this is a pretty good find. If you took Bradish either as a late dart or picked him up as an early season addition, it's been really good overall.
I think actually looking at his results, you could have avoided some of these situations playing the careful game, right? The start him, don't start him. I mean, I'm just going to list his worst starts, and I think you would have not, like, if you were just a little bit careful with him, you wouldn't have started him for a lot of them. So home Boston, at Detroit. Now that's obviously one you would just wear because you would have pitched him. At Atlanta, at New York Yankees, and that's it. Maybe at San Francisco Giants. So 2 of those are, you would have started him probably at the Giants and at Detroit, but you would have avoided the 2 worst starts of the year if you didn't have him pitch against Boston and at Atlanta.
Yeah, that Boston start back in April would have been probably borderline for a lot of leagues. I think you would have said, not sure I trust this guy yet. I don't know, but Baltimore's adjustment to the park last year might have been enough to say it's a home start in a deep enough league, 15-team league. I'm in. He might have been your last pitcher in for that. So that one's like the most borderline. At Atlanta, I think people would have avoided, and maybe at the Yankees with Judge healthy back in late May, that would have been one you probably could have sidestepped. But yeah, he would have been active most of these starts so far.
And there are starts that he did well that might have been borderline. Texas at home, Toronto at home. But he, and then there's the ones where you definitely wanted to start him. Pittsburgh, he's done well in a lot of those starts. So, Pittsburgh at home, he did what he was supposed to do. So at Washington, he did what he was supposed to do. So yeah, I think you could be careful with him and maybe you'll avoid a blow up or 2. And definitely what Paul Sporer calls a team streamer in 15-team leagues, where I can't drop him, but that doesn't mean that he's necessarily my best starter every week. He's in my lineup every week.
All right, let's move on to one guy who's currently on the IL, Nestor Cortes, and I think he's kind of interesting because much like Sandy Alcantara, when I take a look at Nestor Cortes and the basic things we look at with a pitcher, I don't see anything that's a lot different than last year. I mean, this is the guy that was really effective a season ago. I didn't expect a mid-2s ERA and a sub-1 whip again, but I expected a lot more than a 5.16 and a 1.30 so far, still getting a strikeout per inning. Once we get Cortes back from the IL, is there any reason to believe he can't at least split the difference between what he did last season and what he's been doing this year with the bloated ratios?
Yeah, there's something going on with the slider a little bit. It definitely has more depth than it used to, and that's not always good, especially given the fact that he throws it 77 miles an hour. Maybe it's secretly a curve, there's some year-to-year difference in the way that his breaking balls are performing. I don't know. His breaking balls are below average by Stuff Plus this year, and I think they were above average last year. So there's a slight difference in the movement patterns on his pitches, and a tiny degradation in velo, at least off his peak. When he was performing at his best last year, he was over 92. This year he's under 92. But again, I think this is a little bit where, he wasn't as good as he was last year, but he's not as bad as he's been this year. And, so that's a fairly easy one to sort of parse for me, where it's like, yeah, sure, I'll pick him up if he got dropped.
Yeah, probably a high 3s, low 4s ERA and like a 120, 122 whip the rest of the way that's what the bats got on him. I think that's maybe a tick high, but not way off based on how he did it a year ago. Home run rate being up this year, not a big surprise. He's not overpowering. I mean, that ballpark, it boosts power for lefties and righties. So, yeah, it's better to be a lefty as a pitcher at Yankee Stadium than a righty, given the way the park plays. But still, it's not an easy place to pitch.
Yeah, it's true, but he has a lower home run rate at home, and as a lefty, at least he's suppressing lefties from getting to that short porch and right. So, in some ways, lefties are better suited for that ballpark. He strikes out 10 per 9 per career against lefties with a lower home run rate. So, he's a guy. I like him. I don't like shoulder injuries. So, there's one aspect of maybe he's the guy that I pick up but leave on the bench for the first start, just to see where the velo's at, just to see what's going on.
Yeah, that's probably a good way to play it, just to make sure that everything is back to where it's supposed to be once Cortes is back. Let's get into some pull rate conversation. This is a question that came in from Jack, and Jack was trying to dig into what was going on with some slumping players and started looking at rolling pull rates on Fangraphs. Jack wrote, I know batters tend to hit harder when they pull the ball, but is there a Goldilocks zone for pull rate? How much pull is too much? And would pulling more or less be an effective fix for some slumping players? When is it better to hit the ball the opposite way?
That is a huge philosophical question. Big debate I've been having on Twitter ever since I wrote that piece about hitting a couple weeks ago. I would say that once you start approaching 50%, I get worried. It's a little bit like the 50% fly ball thing, where I just feel like when you get up to 50% pull, like, you're predictable. It's like a pitcher, once they do get over 50% in any split with a pitch, that the hitter is going to sit on that pitch, right? That's why I even mentioned that Sandy Alcantara's, doing some weird stuff with four seamers with batters on base, because it was approaching 50%. And if you get to 50%, you'd be like, I'm sitting four seam here, And so what happens when you look at a hitter that's over 50% pull? Like, this dude is looking inner half. This dude is trying to get the ball out in front. I'm going to fill him up with sliders. I'm going to fill him up, outer half, low down, very top of the pull percentage is also a guy who hits 50% fly balls. So Max Muncy, 50%, 55% pull percentage, 51% fly balls. Guess what his BABIP is?
It's bad. It's 180. I got that leaderboard open too. And
Yeah,
it's bad. It's a really bad combination because you're going to end up, even though you do damage, a lot of these guys are going to be good barrelers. But with the Muncy combo, Kyle Schwarber's here too. Pulling it that much and lifting it that much, well, you're going to fly out to your pull side a lot on the way.
Fly balls. I think it also leads to sort of rolling over and then fly balls don't have great BABIPs themselves, and pop-ups on these guys. The pop-up on Muncy, Paredes, if you look at IFFB, it's better if you multiply it by fly ball rate, but a lot of these guys are fly ball guys. They're pull fly ball guys. So if you look at pop-up rates, there's a lot of high pop-up rates at the top of the pull percentage. Look at that. You got Max Muncy at 16, Paredes at 20%, Schwarber at 17. I think league average is 10 or something. Dalton Varsho at 21%. Jose Ramirez even 15, Buxton 19. So these are all the go get it, pull fly ball, do this for power guys as a group. And you know, I'm not necessarily like the piece that I wrote, I don't think I'm necessarily advocating that. The sort of approach that I like best are guys who are flat through the zone and sometimes catch the ball out in front, but aren't necessarily optimizing to always catch the ball out in front. And one thing that I can sort of point to is, I think one of my sort of North Stars on this is Justin Turner. You know, he's the first guy who told me, you know, I want to get the ball out in front of the plate. And Justin Turner, his pull percentage is 40% this year, and that's higher than his career high. He's always been at sort of 35 to 40%. And in terms of fly ball rates, he's always been around 40%. So, you know, he's a guy who has real natural feel for hit, a guy with a good hit tool, always had good strikeout rates and batting averages, who just tweaked his approach a little bit to go get the ball out in front a little bit more. And it was good for him. But for people that sort of go all in on this, Cal Raleigh, Byron Buxton, why does Dalton Varsho have a bad batting average all of a sudden? Kyle Schwarber, Max Muncy, you know the names on this list. You know, there are guys that strike out, pop up, and don't have great batting averages. So, you know, there's some young players who are close to this, and you know, I guess it's kind of interesting to think about Spencer Torkelson through this viewpoint right now. He is barreling the ball better, and he's hitting the ball harder, and those are good things. And he is a guy that has some decent ability to make contact, decent eye to play. But right now he's got a 48% pull rate and a 44% fly ball rate and a 15% pop-up rate. You know, Tristan Casas, 47% a pull rate, 43% fly ball rate, 13% pop-up rate. Oh, no, I'm looking in the wrong place. 10% pop-up rate. So he's not popping things up. He's a good hit tool. Maybe it'll work for him. But those are two young players where I'm like, it's a little close to the danger zone, you know?
Yeah, and I think at the opposite end of the scale, you know, you look at guys that go the other way a lot. Among qualified hitters, Bo Bichette's number one by a healthy margin, 41.4% opposite field rate. If you've watched Bo Bichette, he fits into the good hit tool and as a result is a good bad ball hitter. So there's some bad that comes with that, even though Bo Bichette does this exceptionally well, right? He doesn't walk because when you can hit everything, you don't have to walk. You can just find a pitch you like and slap it somewhere and you're on base. And you might even slap it down the line for a double going the opposite way.
He has more power than anybody else around him on the list, though.
Right. He's on pace to probably hit 30 home runs for the first time in his career, which is pretty unusual because most of the guys on the list, Miles Straw, no power. Brian Hayes, we've been looking for the power forever. Christian Yelich used to have power, goes the opposite way a lot now. Paul Goldschmidt, okay, he's still got power. Bryson Stott, not a lot of power. Joey Meneses, not as much power as you'd expect. Bohm, we've been waiting on it for him.
Luis Arraez,
Esteury Ruiz is on this list. There's a few players that have power sprinkled in. Adley Rutschman, Nathaniel Lowe's got some. Manny Machado's top 15 right now in opposite field percentage.
Not his best year either.
Right. So it's just so interesting that you can it really depends on like other factors. Like is the Goldilocks range for a hitter probably depends on other things
How
that
much
you
natural
can't define.
power they have, how much natural hit tool. Like I said with Justin Turner, is like, here's a guy with hit tool who went and got the ball more, right? Like, hey, could Brian Hayes maybe actually try out a 35% pull rate for a little bit?
Right.
I know that's not something you say to a hitter. I know you don't say that in the hitting
Try
session.
out this number.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Like it's a
But
pair of
like,
pants.
yeah, right. But like, I would love statistically to see what Brian Hayes would do with like a 35 to 40% pull rate and a 40% fly ball rate, just because he starts with such a great hit tool. He's starting in such a great spot. In fact, like Paul Goldschmidt is a good example of this. Yes, he goes oppo a lot, but he used to go oppo more. And when I asked him at the All-Star game one year, like how did you really break out? He said, by learning to pull the ball sometimes. So right, like he's a pretty good example. Here's a guy who, does have a natural inclination to go oppo, but also has added pull to become more of a power hitter. So could that work for Stott? Could that work for Lowe? I thought last year's breakout for Lowe was a little bit of that, but not really. I guess it turns out.
I was wondering too, if you look at just exit velos on fastballs, if you can sort of reverse engineer how much bat speed a player has. But the problem you run into is some of the guys that can hit fastballs hard are letting it travel, right? And they're going the opposite way. And that's where Brian Hayes popped up on that leaderboard. DJ LeMahieu popped up on that leaderboard as guys that they didn't quite fit that mold of someone that I would have thought of as a great fastball hitter when thinking about power. But it's because they're taking those fastballs and driving them the opposite way and sacrificing
low launch angles because of the geometry of the swing. If you're letting it travel, a lot of times you're hitting that more on the downward trajectory of your swing. And so that's why I think sometimes barrels do perform better than hard hit rate overall. And barrels are more predictive. And I think that's what you're getting at is part of it. Like you had a Brian Hayes spray chart, against 95 mile an hour fastballs, and it's kind of
almost all to the right side. It's thumb up the middle, a lot to the right side, and like 2 balls hit to the left side that were probably rolled over.
And so none of those are barrels. Like those are hard hit balls, but they're not launched.
No.
Yeah.
No, the 2 to the left side were like right where the shortstop would be.
Yeah, right. So, I think. I don't know if we're answering this satisfactorily. Of course, in our style, a little bit wishy-washy, but
no. Like I think there is a range, but I think it's unique to a hitter's skill set, and you can bucket different hitters together.
Yeah,
but you're going to find that there are certain guys that should not pull. Bo Bichette shouldn't try to pull the ball as much as Max Muncy does. That wouldn't be a good adjustment for him. Would you agree with that? Like that's a fair statement, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it totally is. But I do wonder how much do you use it to ding a young Jeremy Pena, Spencer Torkelson, or Tristan Casas? Like, that's where really the pedal hits the metal, right? Like, it's a little bit easier to be like, okay, this is working for Paredes because he has that good hit tool and he's making the most of his balls in play. He's just because he has a good hit tool, like this is a good way for him to be. It's fair to be like, well, maybe Schwarber and Muncy are just not going to be any different than this. Like maybe this is just who they are. They're just leaning in, But it also is fair to say, like, going forward, I will ding Jose Ramirez, Byron Buxton, Kyle Schwarber, Max Muncy. I will not expect a good batting average for them. And maybe Ozzie Albies, who's sitting there second at pull percentage.
Albies is having a year that I think we can safely describe as unusual, but not necessarily bad at all, because 17 homers, 268, 320, 504. Yeah, that sounds great. He's got a few steals now. Last time I looked,
he's like Byron Buxton thing, where he's like not stealing bases anymore, and he's becoming like a pull power hitter.
Right. He's on pace for 35 homers and 6 steals. It's fine. Like it's a net value, like positive player where I drafted him. It's like, well, that's just not quite the the way I thought the
you
categories were going to work.
Yeah, I mean, you hit 259, 30 and went 30-20 2 years ago.
Right, and I believed in him in part because we saw those back-to-back seasons, even though one was the shortened season of 9% barrel rates,
hitting, good,
low K rates,
yeah,
and all that's still there. And maybe he'll run more this point forward and get to 12 or 15 steals, and it won't be that different when it's all said and done.
He's trying to do the Jose Ramirez.
Okay, is that a good idea? Do you think he can? Do you think he should? It's not a bad thing to try to be if you have the tools to be that player, but do you think Albies has shown us enough to do that?
The reason I'm hesitating is because of Albies not being as good from the left side.
Yeah.
Which is still true, right? 213 versus righties this year. With 85 WRC plus. Still true. 718 slugging against lefties. Oh, Ozzie Albies, I'll never understand you.
Yeah,
I love watching him, though. He's fun to watch.
He is fun to watch. The other player on that poll percentage leaderboard comes up in my timeline a lot because, well, for you tweets are still a thing. Please make them go away. Yeah. The poll percentage of Willy Adames is really high. And I would say when you see a player who's struggling and you see a big shift in batted ball types like this, it leads you down. Like if you could ask if I were in the clubhouse and said, "What's going on? You're pulling the ball a lot this year." Like maybe he wouldn't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
But the approach he had the last two seasons seemingly worked a lot better. So I don't know if this is. I've seen someone on Twitter speculate that he's trying to kind of put the offense on his back and hit a 3-run homer every time he swings the bat.
His way out of a slump too.
Yeah, and it's just kind of the results so far are a poor approach or a broken approach that needs to be adjusted to get him back on track.
Yeah, because otherwise you would say, I look at the barrel rate, I look at, the walk and strikeout rates, and they're all in line with the past. And, other than pull percentage, you're like, this guy's fine.
Right. So probably a little bit of work to be done there to get Willy Adames back on track. Projections say he will figure it out and get back, but that's the one thing that's really different about him so far that gives me a little bit of pause about just assuming it's going to happen.
I guess the Goldilocks range is like, it's a little bit like fly ball rate, where like once you get to 50%, you have got my full attention. And once you're under, I think about 35%, I consider you more of a slap spray hitter where it's going to affect your power. And it's largely true for the guys on this list. The only real standouts start to come when you get closer to 35%. Goldschmidt at 33%, Gleyber Torres at 33%, William Contreras at 33%, Sander Bogarts at 34%, Brandon Marsh at 35%. I mean, already now you're starting to get to 35%, where I'm like, yeah, you could be fine there. Those are the only power hitters on this list.
Thanks a lot for that question, Jack. We've got a question about Zach Eflin. And Zach Eflin is having a pretty unusual season because he doesn't look like he's overpowering anyone. That was never really expected. You take a look at the pitch mix, more cutters and curves seem like the changes, but the movement profile of his pitches looks pretty different as well. So what have the Rays been able to do with him to this point that enabled Zach Eflin to string together a half season with really the best ratios of his career by a pretty healthy margin?
He's an interesting guy because due to the Tampa Bay home park factor and other results type stuff, his projections were pretty good despite not having a pitch that stuff plus rates as above average. I sort of think of Chris Bassett when I look at Zach Eflin now. He's a guy with a ton of pitches, kitchen sink, trying to never really be predictable. And in terms of what they've done for him. I think a fair amount of it had to do with the curveball, and increasing, a little bit the velo and the vertical movement. He's got a lot more drop on the curveball this year. And I think that just leads to more separation. The curveball last year, in terms of difference in drop from the cutter, was around 9 to 10 inches, and it's more than that now. And the cutter, the curve in general, like he sometimes throws a slider. The curve is very different from the slider now. And in terms of horizontal movement, the curveball just has more movement, So I think it's just become a better pitch for him. And if you look at the horizontal movement in particular, like the four seam is different this year. The slider is different this year. The curve is different this year. So they've spread his pitches out. I think of the sort of banana peel effect where, if you look at Brooks, they have you can have the movement patterns and you can see, how tight the pitches are, and I like it a lot of times when there's like a wide band of vertical and horizontal movement between the pitches. So when pitches sort of diverge from each other, I like that.
Yeah, it just seems like the pitches are more compatible with each other. There's a more carefully crafted game plan for how they work compared to what we saw in the past.
The changeup this year has just added 3 inches of drop. Is he actually throwing it though? Hey, he's thrown 969 of them. This is interesting. This might be the biggest change on the board. Right now, the changeup is getting 4 inches more drop than it did last year.
It's pretty good.
Yeah. And in terms of what it's doing outcomes-wise, let's see, from the last 2 months. Let me just do the last 2 months because it's only been this way for the last 2 months. Change up in the last 2 months, 182 batting average against, 0 ISO. I mean, this is there is an archetype here, which is that I'm always going to push pitchers with lots of pitches up a little bit in my ranks.
Yeah, more ways to adjust and keep hitters off balance and find Ks and find new levels of success, right?
It doesn't always work. I mean, Ross Stripling has a lot of pitches and, it hasn't been a good season for him, but it's the Hyunjin Ryu is the archetype of this group.
Thanks a lot for that question. For some reason, I don't know who sent that question, even though I know it was a mailbag question. So we'll say it was anonymous, even though there was a name on it. One more to get to, a hitter question about TJ Friedl. It boils down to how exactly is he doing this? Entering play on Wednesday, TJ Friedl has a 322, 379, 492 line. That's a 129 WRC plus. Not a ton of power, 4 homers so far, 8 for 9 is a base stealer, but a pretty nice player for an endgame guy that has kind of carved out not quite an everyday role, but a pretty significant role on an improving Reds team.
Yeah. I was going to say home road splits, but the power 617 slugging at home, 385 away. So definitely home park is helping him there. But he has a 371 BABIP at home, 390 away. And the one thing that really sticks out for me is his batting average on balls in play. A guy who had a 251 last year has a 381 this year. I think that's the largest source of differential there. And unfortunately, I think it's mostly luck. I know there was an interesting tweet today that Casper at Casper Stats was writing about a batter being able to sort of place the ball, and if Luis Arraez has the ability to kind of place the ball, and what that could mean, but. Until I know a little bit more, I'm not going to say that I don't believe in it, but I don't think, just sort of generally, I'm not sure how much ability batters have to place the ball. Yes, I do believe they can generally go pull or oppo. We just had this conversation.
Right.
But in terms of like pull here.
So you're saying like it's
there
a little harder to have a consistent 9-iron that you're going to hit where you're just lifting it over the infield, but dropping it in front of the outfielder. Consistently.
And Arraez seems to have that this year. It's the Magic Wandu. It's the 200-foot hit. He's got the 200-foot hit down this year, where they just keep landing in front of the outfielders, right? But I also mean, like, let's say a hitter does have the ability to go oppo ground ball, right? That seems possible mechanically. How good would they have to be at that to like go oppo ground ball where the second baseman wasn't?
Right.
as a
That'd
righty.
be very hard to do
That's what
to
I'm
shoot those
saying.
gaps. Yes,
Yeah.
because you have to also hit it hard enough to hit it through those gaps.
Yeah, and the ball's moving and your bat's moving and I have immense respect for athletes and I believe they can do all sorts of things and a lot of times they just baffle me with the things they say they can do, but this one I'm not sure that batters really have that ability. So I would guess that his XBA is 250. Even if you give him a little credit for being able to place the ball, I would say, his batting average going forward is going to be more like 260. And if you revise the whole line around it to a 260 batting average, you get a lot of the same guy you would have got last year. And if you paste out the guy who you had last year to a full season, 250, 15, 15. So I would take half of that going forward.
250, 15, 15. I mean, that might be good enough to keep a large share of a platoon in that outfield if he's their
Yes, but
worst outfielder. I don't know. I look at a guy like Will Benson and I just think there's so many more ways for Will Benson to hurt you long term as a big league player than there is for TJ Friedl. And if you had to bet on one of them, I would bet on Will Benson, even though Friedl has been the preferred option for the Reds up to this point.
yeah, Benson's getting hot too, and he's just got the more traditional like high walk rate, decent contact, good ball, good batted ball quality. Like he's an easily projectable guy. You're not sort of relying on any magic wandu, and so I believe that, but I also believe that this outfield is under attack.
Yep.
And it's under attack by the infield.
Yep.
And Nick Senzel's going to join the outfield, or if he hasn't already. And Christian Encarnacion Strand, I do believe he has taken an outfielder's glove. Let me confirm that.
He has started to play out there a bit in the minors.
Yeah,
Yep.
he has. The assault on the outfield is just begun. And there are going to be jobs lost in this outfield.
Yeah, it's a profile. TJ Friedl has a profile, and Will Benson has a different set of flaws. Both of them could fail for completely different reasons, or they
Right.
could each succeed for wildly different reasons. They're just very different players. They are going to have a difficult time. Both players are going to have a difficult time holding on to long-term spots as they get more talented players onto this roster. That is going to be the uphill battle. Their window might be from now until the trade deadline, depending on how aggressive the Reds want to be. Otherwise, it's probably now until the end of the season before things really start to get crowded in 2024.
I mean, the Reds are in first, amazingly. And if you've got CES coming up, Christian Encarnacion Strand, and he looks like he's ready. He's hitting the ball, cover off the ball. You don't bring him up to play part time. So you're testing him in left and right, and like I'm guessing he's going to pass that test. Worst case scenario, who doesn't pass that test and he DHs, but that also means that anybody who's DH, like he becomes kind of a full-time DH or full-time first baseman, in which case Spencer Steer is just, hanging out. And Spencer Steer has been tried in the outfield. So that's part of this sort of attack on the outfield that I'm talking about. So Senzel, Steer, and CES are headed towards DH and outfield. That's three guys that are pretty good. So that basically pushes Benson and Friedl and Fraley into one outfield position and backup outfield position. And they're a team that could use pitching. So there seems to be like a trade, an outfielder trade happening. I mean, they'd probably get more if they trade an infielder, but McClain looks great at short. Ellie De La Cruz is the future. Votto, he wants to win. He wants to stay and win. Like I don't think he has trade value.
3 weeks ago, this was a team that was going to have to trade Joey Votto because they weren't good this year and they had nowhere to play him. And now he wants to stay and eat the chili and win a title.
Yeah,
3 weeks.
I don't know what they're willing to part with, but like maybe Friedl and maybe Benson is the guy that gets them a pitcher. In which case, Friedl wins and stays, and Fraley is the backup center fielder to Senzel, I guess.
I don't even know if Will Benson gets you a whole lot. That was a pretty small trade that brought him to Cincinnati in the first place. So I don't think that's going to get you I mean, he's probably a secondary piece or an extra player you put in a trade just because someone else is intrigued by him.
McLean, CES, Ellie De La Cruz, unless they trade like Noelvi Marte.
Yeah, that could happen.
Well, that part's interesting, but I think generally, you better play well if you're a Reds outfielder.
Yeah, I'm looking at the projections as a better guide for what Friedl's likely to do the rest of the way. They've got him as a below average player by WRC plus. I think the BABIP you pointed out is a huge part of why he's been able to prop up a slash line that's just way better than expected at this point. I think he's a nice fourth outfielder, and I think as that team gets better, that's the role he's most likely to end up in. Thanks a lot for that question, Mason. If you got a question for a future episode, you can send those our way at ratesandbarrels@gmail.com is the easiest way to get those to us. At Eno Saris on Twitter, at Derek Van Riper, if you want to look for us there. You can also follow the pod at Rates and Barrels. If you're watching us on YouTube, be sure to hit the like button on this video. If you made it all the way to the end, congratulations. That's got to be some kind of record. 65 minutes on a YouTube video. That's unbelievable, unless you're doing the white noise thing or background music while you work. So
putting your babies to sleep.
wouldn't know much about that, but again, if you got questions for a future episode, we're always happy to take those, and we've got another episode coming up on Friday. So that's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We are back with you on Friday.
Thanks for listening.